Hi there, this is Derek Mickelson with the Manitoba Knowledge and Research Transfer Program, and today we're going to be talking about sampling and monitoring for the Varroa mite. So first off, the Varroa mite is one of the worst pests of a honeybee colony. Not only are the mites in there feeding on the bees and weakening their immune systems, but they also harbor a number of different viruses, which can cause extensive damage to a honeybee colony, and those viruses can actually linger in a colony well after those mites themselves have actually been controlled. So it's extremely important that all beekeepers know how to test for Varroa and to monitor those levels throughout the season, to know what's going on in your colony and to be able to make informed treatment decisions. So there's a number of different methods of monitoring for Varroa. We're going to talk about three methods today. We'll talk about the alcohol wash, we're going to talk about the sugar shake, and we'll touch on sticky boards as well. When we're monitoring for Varroa, the typical recommendation is to monitor at least 4 times per year. You want to monitor in the spring and in the fall, but you want to monitor twice in each of those seasons. So you want to monitor before you apply any treatment, and you want to monitor after your treatment is completed to make sure that treatment has actually worked. So in both the spring and the fall, you want to monitor twice. If you're a small hobby beekeeper with, say, less than 10 colonies, it's recommended to sample all of those colonies to get a good picture of what's going on within each colony. If you're a larger sideliner or a commercial beekeeper with larger yards, it's recommended to sample a subset of those colonies. Usually about 8 colonies per yard would be a good number to sample. So for both the alcohol wash and the sugar shake, what you need is about 300 bees to get a good sample. And there's some different methods of actually collecting 300 bees, and I'll show you what those are. We'll be talking about the alcohol wash here first. And what I'm going to demonstrate is using one of these handy little field shaking devices that you can purchase at your local bee supply store. So what one of these devices is just basically 2 jars that have a metal screen in between the jars, so you can shake the bees up. The mites will fall through that screen, and you can count the mites down below. If you're handy and you want to make up your own sampling container, you can do so with just a couple of mason jars. You can glue that lid together with some really strong adhesive, and then you can put some metal screen in between. This is number 8 hardware cloth that you can purchase at a hardware store. And this is big enough that the mites will actually fall through and the bees will stay in the jar. So just to say that, you can make your own if you're so inclined. We'll just stick that aside. Another one that you can purchase at a bee supply store is the Varroa Easy Check. This is a super handy device. It works very similar to one of these. This can actually be used for either an alcohol wash or a sugar shake. Super handy. I'll put that aside for now. So with the alcohol wash, you can use either 70% ethanol. You can use isopropyl alcohol that you can purchase at a pharmacy. Another thing that you can use is windshield washer fluid. It's important that it's winter windshield washer fluid. This will actually contain some alcohol to prevent the washer fluid from freezing. And another thing that's important is not to get the stuff with the bug wash or any additional soap or anything like that, as that's going to foam up quite a bit, and it's going to make it a little harder to actually see the mites. So we'll jump over into the hive here, and I'll just show you how to collect 300 bees. First thing you can use is one of these little sample containers. And this is typically what we use here in the research apiary for collecting all our samples. This is a 120 milliliter sample container, and a sample container this size, lightly packed of bees, is going to be about 300 bees. What is also about 300 bees is just a measuring cup. This is a half cup measuring spoon. And this is also, it's roughly about 120 milliliters, and so this is also going to be about 300 bees. So you can use that to collect your bees as well. So we'll hop over into the hive here, and it's really important. First off, it's really important that you find the queen and stick her somewhere safe. You don't want to be sampling your queen and taking her out of the hive. So we've opened this hive already. We've gone through it. We've located the queen. She's just stuck into this nuke box. She's in there safe, so I know that I can sample bees without taking the queen. So when you do collect your sample, the best frame to sample off is going to be from a brood frame. So the majority of the mites in the colony are down in the brood nest. They are reproducing in the brood cells. They're coming out of the brood cells on the bees. They're also attracted to open brood. So probably the best frame would be one with a mixture of capped brood and some open brood as well. But really any frame from down inside the brood nest is going to give you a pretty accurate estimate of how many bees are in your colony. So I'll sample up this frame here, just using my sample jar. And the way I like to do it is just to put the frame up on its end like this, tilt it forward a little bit. I like to get the bees in it going up like that. Some people like to just roll the cup down and the bees just roll right into the cup. But just my personal preference, I like to go up like this. You don't want to be pushing too hard that you're ruining the cappings of those brood cells. And you can just kind of tamp it down in between. Just collect some more bees from this side. And so a loosely packed cup will be very close to about 300 bees. So you can then put that frame back in the colony, and then you can use this jar. You can just pour those bees right down into your field shaker. You could also use your field shaker to collect the bees, just scoop the bees right into here. It's a little more difficult to know how many bees to put in here. That's going to be about 300. What I like to do is just draw a line on that shaking container where 300 bees is. So you can use a cup like this the first time, get those bees down in there, and then just draw a line where 300 bees is. And then you can just use this the next time to scoop up your bees. The other way to do it would be using sort of a wash basin container like this, and just pulling a frame covered with bees. And what you do then is just shake the bees down into the wash basin. So let's give it a good bang and get these bees down into the basin. Put that frame aside. These bees are in there. I would then just tamp the bees down into the corner and just scoop up about half a cup of bees and just pour those bees down into the container like that. Just grab a few more. So that something like that would be about 300 bees. Close that up, and then we can use that for shaking. And then we can just dump the rest of the bees back into the colony. So I'll bring this back over to the table. Now, we've been sampling here in the KRTP research apiary for the last couple of weeks. We're obviously right in the middle of summer here. We still have all our honey supers on. We've been having a real hard time actually finding mites in the yard right now. So that's not the usual case for a typical research apiary, but we're having a bit of trouble finding mites. So what I've done is I've just actually put 300 bees into a different sample container, and I've actually just added some mites for the purpose of this demonstration that we collected earlier in the season. So I know roughly how many mites are in this jar right now. So what you would do if the bees are in here, you would put that screen lid on, and then you can add either your alcohol or your washer fluid. So I'm going to use the washer fluid, and you can just pour it right down on top of the bees. So you want to fill the washer fluid to just above the level of the bees. Put both jars on the lid. And then you want to give it a really good shake for about a minute. And try to shake all of those mites off of those bees. You can kind of twist it around, shake it up and down. So after about a minute of shaking, the vast majority of those mites should be off the bees by now. and then we can flip the jar upside down and see how many mites we had in our sample. So there's a couple different ways of flipping over. You could flip it straight down like that. Some people call this the tornado method of actually flipping while you're spinning. And some people think that the mites have more of a chance of actually coming to the bottom if you do it that way. And then you would look from the bottom and see how many mites you can see now. Not seeing too many directly on the bottom, but I am seeing some that are floating on top. So as I mentioned, sometimes the mites will float on the top, and in this case, most of them are floating. They might just need a minute to actually sink to the bottom. There's one at the bottom there now that you can see. So I'd give it a little bit of time for those mites to actually sink from the bottom. What you can also do is just rig up a little strainer system. This is just a piece of honey straining cloth here that I have secured to an old yogurt container, just with a piece of elastic. And what you can do is just detach that bottom container and just strain that fluid through that honey straining cloth. And now actually you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mites that have showed up. And if you want to be absolutely certain that you've got all the mites, I would just do that whole thing again. You don't have to necessarily shake for a minute, but just give it another little shake and then tip it upside down again. Try to get all those mites out from that bee cluster. And then again, you can detach that bottom container and strain it through. So we have 7 there now. Let's see if any more come out. I do see one additional, oh, there's 2 additional mites there. So there were 2 extra mites that came out. Now I have lots of washer fluid in here, so they're floating here. But there was 2 additional ones, so there's a total of 9, which is actually exactly what I added to the sample. So there were 9 mites in 300 bees, and so if you want to do a real quick calculation, basically you can take your number of mites and just divide by 3 to get a rough percentage. So this would be about a 3% infestation, 9 mites in 300 bees. So that would be how you would do the field shaking method. Another way that you can shake for mites in the field is just to use a large bucket like this and have it pretty full with washer fluid. And just take a larger piece of straining cloth and drape that right over that bucket. And then you can use, this is just a small deep fryer basket. It's roughly about number 8 mesh as well. And you can just put that down in the bucket. And if you have a sample of bees, I've collected this one a while back. This has a fair number of mites in it. Just take your sample and dump it into your deep fryer container and just give that a good shake right inside the bucket, and any of those mites that are on the bees are going to fall through that mesh and land on the honey straining cloth. So I would shake this for about a minute or so. Try to get all those mites off. You could do this a couple times and see how many mites you get. And then if you just pull that straining cloth up, you can see how many mites are on the cloth. So in this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is a piece of wax. 8 mites. 9 mites over here. So if you wanted, you could collect all those mites off of there, just put them back into your jar, and then you could do it again. So do it again. See if any more mites come off. And again, there was 1 additional mite this time. So for a total of 10 mites. So again, around that 3% infestation, just above 3%, 10 mites in 300 bees. Okay, so shifting gears, we'll just talk about the sugar shake method now. The materials that you need to do a sugar shake, instead of using one of those field shaking devices for the alcohol wash, what you need is just something like a 500 milliliter mason jar. And you would remove the metal lid that comes with the mason jar and just replace it with a piece of metal screen. Again, this is number 8 hardware cloth that will allow the mites to fall through. You also need just some regular icing sugar and 1 tablespoon measuring spoon. It's also really handy to have a white surface. So either a white tray like this or potentially a wash basin that you can use. And so I've gone ahead and collected 300 bees into this container already. And again, I've added some mites here just for the purposes of this demonstration. So what you would do with the sugar shake, you need about 1 to 2 tablespoons of sugar. And once the bees are in the container, you can just add that sugar through that mesh lid. So there's 1 tablespoon down in there. I'll add another tablespoon. And you want to coat all those bees with icing sugar. So shake it around a bit. You can roll it. Try to coat those bees in the icing sugar as much as possible. And the icing sugar works to make the bees' bodies slippery and the mites will possibly fall off. It also activates the bees' grooming behavior and they might be able to knock mites off that way. Leaving it out just for a minute or two, kind of in the sun or in the heat, will warm up the jar, and that may also help to remove some mites. So after about a minute, what you would do is just flip that jar upside down and just start shaking the jar, just kind of like shaking a pepper jar at home, and try to shake those mites out of that container and off of those bees. Now this method, the bees will survive. The shaking doesn't really injure the bees too much. They have a nice hard exoskeleton. They can withstand some shaking, and you can put the bees back in the hive afterwards. So the benefit of this method is it doesn't kill bees. I will say that this method is not as accurate as something like an alcohol wash. The alcohol wash is going to be a much more accurate method to use. But this method will give you a pretty good idea of your level of infestation now. So you can see on the white tray, you can't really see any mites right now. But if you just take a spray bottle full of water, or even just pour some water over top of it, it's going to dissolve that icing sugar and you're going to be able to see the mites a lot clearer. And so you can see there's 1 mite right here, and then another mite over here as well. So that was 2 mites that came out. I'm just going to go ahead and shake it a little bit more and see if any more come out. And then we can give it another spray. And actually there was 1 additional mite that fell down there. So there's a total of 3 mites that have come out. We could do it again and maybe again and see if there was any more that come out. But usually a couple times we'll get most of those mites out of there. So if you take your 3 mites divided by 3, that would be about a 1% infestation. And then again, you could just remove that lid and shake those bees down in front of the colony. They'll clean themselves off, they'll clean each other off, and they would find their way back into the colony. Okay, so lastly, we're just going to talk about sticky boards. So sticky boards can be a really effective monitoring tool, in particular during the summer months when you have a lot of heavy honey supers on your colonies. You might not necessarily want to lift all those honey supers off. take a sample from your brood chamber. So having these just on your bottom board to measure the number of mites that are falling to the bottom board can really be an effective monitoring tool. It is a little bit more difficult to relay the number of mites that are falling onto your bottom boards to your overall level of your percent infestation. So, using your sticky boards to monitor that mite drop and then following up with something like an alcohol wash or a sugar shake would give you a much more accurate measure of your infestation level. So there's some sticky boards that are commercially available that you can buy at your local bee supply store. This is a typical one that you would find. Basically, it's just a really sticky surface covered with a piece of paper. So you would peel that piece of paper back, stick that onto your bottom board, and leave that in for at least a couple days. There can be some differences between the days in the number of mites that are falling on certain days. Temperature can affect how many mites are falling, things like that. So what you would want to do is write your hive ID down. So if you have your colonies numbered, write the colony number down. You write down the date installed and then also the date that you removed it to know how long that was in your colony. It's recommended to have it in at least 2 days. 3 days would be a good time to have it in. And then you can then calculate how many mites you're seeing on your sticky board divided by the number of days that you had it in to get your mite drop per day. In general, one mite dropping in a 24-hour period is equal to at least a 1% infestation. About 9 mites falling per day would be about a 3% infestation. And somewhere around 30 to 40 mites dropping in a 24-hour period would be about a 5 to 6% infestation. So if you're seeing good numbers of mites falling, follow up with one of the other methods to get a more accurate estimate of your percent infestation. Now you can make up your own sticky boards using something like a file folder or a nice thick sheet of paper. What you'd want to do is draw a grid on it, which makes the counting of mites a lot easier. And what you would do is just take a sticky substance. You can use something like Tanglefoot, which is maybe a little bit overkill, but Vaseline or Crisco vegetable shortening or something like that would work really well. And you would just smear a nice thin layer onto the sticky paper. You can use something like a trowel to smooth it out on your file folder. Now, what you can also do is use something like hardware cloth to put on top of that sticky substance, just to prevent the bees from actually sticking to the sticky paper themselves. Okay, so this here is a colony where I've placed the screen bottom board on the colony. This is a plastic one known as the Varroa. This one is actually invented here in Manitoba. And basically this plastic screen bottom board sits on top of a regular bottom board, and you can screw it down right to that bottom board. Typically in a different orientation in terms of yard setup, the regular bottom board the entrance would be towards the back, so you could slide in this sticky board from the back of the colony, and the bees would continue to use this screen bottom board entrance as their regular entrance. Now, because we have 4 hives to a pallet here, it's not really possible to turn that regular bottom board around, so we just have it facing the front, which is fine. And so we would peel this sticky paper off of it and just slide it down into that area there underneath that screen, and any mites that are falling off of the bees, either due to natural death or the bees grooming behavior, would fall through that screen bottom board and onto that sticky paper. So you would leave that in for at least 2, maybe 3 days, take that out, and then you can look and see how many mites you're seeing on that sticky paper. Okay, and so this is what a typical sticky board would look like when it's pulled out of your colony. And you can see there's quite a lot of debris on here, but there are also mites mixed in with the debris. At first, if you're not very practiced with this, you might want to use a magnifying glass or something like that to actually zoom in and see the mites. But if you look at, I've just circled some here, you can see what the mites would look like. And so you would tally up the whole number of mites that you see on the whole sticky board, divide that by the number of days that you had it in your colony, and come up with your mite drop per day. Okay, and we should also just mention the treatment thresholds for your levels of Varroa that you're seeing in your colonies. The thresholds actually differ depending on what season you're in. So in the springtime, if you're sampling and you're seeing anything over really 1% infestation, that would require a treatment. Anything over that, and you're going to start to see signs of decreased honey production and decreased populations throughout the season. In the fall time, if you're sampling in early fall, say September 1st, the threshold for treatment is somewhere around 1 to 3%. It really depends on the amount of risk that the particular beekeeper is willing to accept. If you are, say, a commercial beekeeper and you make your livelihood, you'd probably want to accept a much lower level of Varroa in your colonies, and your personal threshold might be about 1% before you would actually apply a treatment. If you're more of a hobby beekeeper willing to take a little bit more risk, you can have a personal threshold of say 2 to 3%. But 3% would be your absolute maximum. Anything over 3% in the early fall would definitely require a treatment, or you would probably see that colony perish over the winter. In the late fall, say if you're sampling mid to late October, that treatment threshold actually increases to about 10%. Anything under 10%, that colony would likely survive the winter. Anything over 10%, you might see that colony start to perish. Again, different beekeepers would have different personal thresholds, but research that Dr. Rob Curry's done at the U of M has shown that that late fall threshold is around 10%. In terms of treatments, there are a large number of treatments that are actually available for beekeepers, and it's really good to be rotating through. You're not relying on the same treatments season after season, year after year. So as part of an integrated pest management type system, you should be changing up your treatments from season to season. Otherwise, you may start to see signs of resistance to certain treatments. So there is the Honeybee Health Treatment Guide that is put out by the province of Manitoba. This is available on the Manitoba Beekeepers Association website, and this document has basically all the information you need on applying each of the different treatments. It also has some additional information on the treatment thresholds as well as sampling for Varroa. So that's about it for the demo here. So I hope you learned something and you can apply that to your operation. Thanks a lot and have a great day.